"You're a nobody. Stop acting like you're important," my wife said, loud enough for her parents to smirk, and for my daughter to laugh out loud. I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I simply tapped my fork against the glass. Ting. Then I looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes. Just 3 sentences. By the time I spoke the second, her face had already gone pale. Not because I raised my voice, but because she realized this Sunday brunch wasn't her performance anymore. It was the curtain call for a plan I'd been quietly building for months in the cold, dim basement. I'd been there, hearing them talk about me, watching them laugh at my expense, and patiently collecting every fragment of truth, every piece of evidence needed to shatter this charade. And this morning, everyone at this table would see it. If you've ever been dismissed, erased from your own life, stay with me until the end to see how 3 sentences can turn an entire fate upside down. Sunday brunch at Lauren's house in Austin was treated like a sacred ritual. The kind of event where the table looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, bone china plates from some boutique in Vermont, crystal glasses catching the Texas sunlight just right, and overpriced artisanal jams lined up like trophies. Once I'd sat at the head of that table, back when my presence meant something. Now, my seat felt more like the defendant's chair in a courtroom I could never win. Lauren had orchestrated every detail. The gleam of polished silverware, the folded linen napkins, the smell of fresh pastries drifting in from the kitchen. It wasn't about food. It was about image, her image. The successful entrepreneur, the picture-perfect hostess, the woman who had moved on. Across from me, the empty chair at the head of the table wasn't empty at all. It was occupied by an unspoken truth. I didn't belong here anymore. But they wanted me here today, and I knew why. They thought this was their stage. They had no idea it was about to become mine. Lauren swept into the dining room like she owned the air itself, wearing that silk robe she'd bought during her self-made success phase. $300 worth of fabric, draped just so, like she was about to shoot a lifestyle ad. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, even though she'd supposedly just rolled out of bed. She turned that practiced smile on me, the one she used on clients, neighbors, anyone she wanted to impress. "Morning, Jack," she said, voice smooth but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. The clink of the crystal pitcher followed as she poured herself orange juice. The ice cubes chimed like warning bells. She didn't sit next to me. She never did. Instead, she took the seat opposite, giving herself a clear, unobstructed view. That smile stayed fixed, but her eyes were scanning, assessing, already calculating. I'd seen it 1,000 times, in negotiations, in arguments, in moments where she wanted to make sure she was winning. She thought she was already winning this morning. I let her believe it. Haley appeared a moment later, gliding in with the kind of effortless beauty only 22-year-olds seemed to have. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, casual but intentional, like she'd spent just enough time in the mirror to look like she hadn't. Tyler trailed behind her, tall, broad-shouldered, with that clean-cut future son-in-law look Lauren adored. He wore a perfectly fitted polo, the kind that says I care about appearances without trying too hard. "Morning, Pops," Tyler said, smirking as he slid into his chair. Not Jack, not Dad, just Pops. Haley didn't correct him. She kissed her mother's cheek, then took the seat next to her, leaning in to whisper something that made Lauren laugh softly. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't have to. I'd been the punchline enough times to recognize the setup. The air thickened with the scent of fresh coffee and unspoken judgments. I took a slow sip of water, letting their little performance play out. They thought this was a family gathering. I knew it was the prelude to an execution, and I was the one holding the blade. The front door opened with that heavy, deliberate sound, like an announcement. Patricia and George Reynolds stepped in as if the house itself were theirs. In a way, it always had been. Patricia wore pearls, of course. She always did. Her perfume floated into the dining room a few seconds before she did, sharp and floral, the kind that lingered long after she'd gone. George followed in a tailored blazer, carrying himself like a man who'd never worked a day with his hands, but had strong opinions about those who did. They greeted Lauren warmly, kissing cheeks, exchanging that subtle nod of approval reserved for their own blood. Then their eyes landed on me. George extended his hand, cool, firm, too formal for family, and Patricia gave me that polite smile she'd perfected over decades of charity galas and quiet disapproval. In their world, I had been a mistake Lauren made in her younger years, a phase, a lesson. and in their eyes, I'd overstayed my welcome. Tyler was the first to speak once everyone settled, his voice bright with pride. "My dad just made partner at the firm," he said, glancing at George for approval. George's smile widened. "Stability," he said, almost tasting the word. "That's what makes a family strong." His gaze flicked to me, the message tucked neatly between the syllables. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness roll over my tongue. Haley leaned forward, her tone sweet, but her words dipped in acid. "So, Dad, how's the job hunt going? It's been, 3 months now?" Lauren didn't even look at me. She was too busy buttering a croissant, the knife moving in slow, perfect strokes. The table was filled with polite laughter and the clink of silverware, but underneath it all was the same game we'd been playing for months, a game they thought I didn't know I was losing. I let their little jabs land, every sting, every smirk, because none of them realized I wasn't here to defend myself. I was here to end this. Lauren set her mimosa down with a soft clink, the stem of the glass balanced perfectly between her fingers. She didn't look at me at first. She looked at her parents, then at Haley, then finally, as if it were an afterthought, at me. "Jack," she said, her voice carrying just enough to command the room, "you're a nobody. Stop acting like you're important." It landed like a slap, but no one at the table flinched, not in sympathy for me, anyway. Patricia smirked. George shifted in his chair with the satisfaction of a judge delivering a sentence. Haley let out a quick, almost gleeful laugh. Tyler smiled into his coffee. I didn't smile. Instead, I picked up my fork and tapped it gently against my glass. Ting. The crystal sang into the silence, sharper than any words. I took my time looking at each face, memorizing the way they looked in that moment. Confident, smug, certain they were untouchable. 3 sentences, I said calmly. And I knew, by the time I reached the third, none of them would look the same. 3 months earlier, I was standing on the sidewalk in front of the house I used to own, my life packed into 2 duffel bags, the weight of them pulling at my shoulders as much as the reality I was carrying. I was unemployed. My lease had run out. For the last week, I'd been sleeping in my truck, the cold Texas nights creeping into my bones. I still had a key to the house, but I didn't use it. Instead, I rang the doorbell. Lauren answered after a moment, leaning against the frame like I was a salesman she didn't plan on buying from. "I need a place to stay, just for a little while," I said. My voice didn't plead. I wouldn't give her that. She didn't hesitate. "Basement, my rules. No warmth, no welcome, just terms." And I accepted them, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I knew something she didn't. This wasn't me crawling back. This was me stepping onto the battlefield. The basement was colder than I remembered. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, its weak yellow light casting shadows that made the concrete walls feel closer than they were. The radiator was dead, the small window too high and too dirty to let in anything useful. A thin mattress sat on a metal frame in the corner, the springs groaning when I tested it with my hand. Dust clung to everything, the kind of dust that only settles when a room has been forgotten. Lauren didn't bother to come down the steps. She stood at the top, one hand on the railing. "You can stay as long as you follow my rules. Don't get in my way. Don't embarrass me. And keep to yourself." I nodded once. Fine. She thought she'd relegated me to the shadows, to a place where I'd be invisible. But invisibility is only a prison if you don't know how to use it. I wasn't here to sulk in the dark. I was here to watch and wait. At first, I played my part perfectly, quiet, out of sight. A polite ghost who slipped in and out without leaving a trace. They wanted me invisible, so I became exactly that. And from the shadows, I saw everything. I learned the rhythm of the house. When Lauren left for her catering meetings, when Haley came home from her shifts at the boutique, when Tyler's car sat in the driveway longer than it should. I learned what drawers stayed locked, what conversations hushed when someone else entered the room. I stopped trying to be part of their world. Instead, I positioned myself just outside of it, where the view was clearer. It's amazing what people will say when they think you're not around, what they'll reveal when they've convinced themselves you're no longer a factor. Up in their warm, bright rooms, they thought the basement had buried me. They didn't know I was digging, not into the floor, into their lives. It was a gray, rainy afternoon when it happened. I'd come back earlier than usual, the basement damp with the smell of wet concrete clinging to my clothes. From the hallway upstairs, I heard Lauren's voice, low, sharp, the kind of tone she used when she didn't want to be overheard. "He has no idea," she was saying. "Craig's handled all the paperwork. Jack signs everything without even reading it. My pulse slowed, not sped up. It was the kind of calm that comes before a storm, when the mind starts filing things away instead of reacting. I stood still, just out of sight, the rain tapping against the windows in rhythm with her words. She laughed softly. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. When she hung up, I didn't move. I let the silence stretch, because in that moment, I knew the truth. Whatever game they were playing, I was already a piece on the board. And it was time to stop being a pawn. That night, the basement felt smaller than usual. The air was heavy, pressing against my chest like it wanted to keep me down there. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying Lauren's words over and over. Craig's handled all the paperwork. Jack signs everything without even reading it. I thought back to the past few months, the documents she'd slid in front of me, the clipped instructions to just sign here, the way she always seemed in a hurry, restraining orders, financial agreements, account closures. I'd signed them all without a second glance, telling myself it was just the price of keeping the peace. The more I thought, the colder I felt. Not the kind of cold the broken radiator caused. A deeper, sharper cold that started in the gut and spread outward. I wasn't just broke, I was being erased. And lying there, in that dim basement, I made a decision. If Lauren thought I was blind, I'd let her keep thinking that. Right up until the moment she realized I could see everything. The next morning I drove across town to a coffee shop where the Wi-Fi was strong and the tables in the back stayed empty. I slid into a booth and pulled out my phone. Ethan Carter answered on the second ring. We'd known each other since high school, back when neither of us had much more than a beat-up car and a knack for fixing things. These days, he was a cybersecurity consultant, the kind companies hired to break into their systems before the real criminals could. I didn't waste time. I told him everything. The phone call, the paperwork, the feeling that I was being cut out of my own life. He listened without interrupting, the way only someone who'd seen your worst could. When I finished, he said, "If they buried something, it's still there. People forget. The ghost of a file is harder to kill than the file itself." His voice sharpened. "We just need to find the right grave to dig." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of warmth, because I'd just found my first ally. That night, Ethan came by after Lauren had gone to some charity dinner. We sat in the basement, laptops open, the glow of the screens bouncing off the concrete walls. We started with the obvious, her work computer, her personal laptop. Both were spotless, too spotless. Every browser history cleared, every document folder organized to the point of sterility. It was like walking into a house that smelled of bleach. "Overcleaning is a tell," Ethan muttered. "When someone's hiding something, they scrub the wrong places." He leaned back, thinking. "Old devices," he said finally. "Everyone keeps them. Too much hassle to wipe them properly before tossing them in a drawer." That's when I remembered the attic, a place I hadn't stepped into in years, because Lauren didn't like the mess. 15 minutes later, I was up there, breathing in dust and dry insulation, pushing aside holiday boxes and old luggage. And in the far corner, under a stack of photo albums, I found it. A battered Dell laptop, stickers peeling, power cord still coiled. The kind of grave Ethan had been talking about. We carried the Dell down to the basement like it was a bomb that might go off if handled wrong. Ethan set it on the table, plugged it in, and waited for the ancient machine to groan back to life. It took minutes just to get past the login screen. The desktop was a cluttered mess. Dozens of old icons, half a dozen folders labeled MISC or stuff. Ethan's fingers moved fast, clicking, digging, opening hidden directories. Then he stopped. "Here," he said, pointing at a PDF file named Jack_restraining order_final.pdf. I opened it. My stomach tightened. It looked official. Court letterhead, legal formatting, a judge's signature. But Ethan zoomed in on the signature block, highlighting a name I recognized. "This judge retired 2 years ago," he said. "And look at the case number, wrong format, sloppy." In black and white, there it was. A restraining order with my name on it, forged to look real. Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just petty divorce tactics. This is criminal." I didn't smile. But for the first time, I could see the outline of the weapon I was going to use. Ethan kept digging, his eyes scanning through folders with names that meant nothing until they did. In a directory buried 3 levels deep, he found another PDF, Jack_messages_evidence.pdf. When I opened it, the screen filled with screenshots of text conversations. My number, my name at the top. The messages looked like threats, aggressive, ugly, the kind of words that could get someone locked up or lose custody in a heartbeat. But the more I stared, the more I saw the seams. The font alignment was off. The timestamps didn't match. Ethan pulled up the file's metadata, his mouth twisting into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "These were made on this laptop," he said, "using a message simulation app. It even left a watermark in the original file before she cropped it out." I leaned back, breathing slow. They hadn't just tried to push me out. They'd been building a paper trail to bury me. And now I had proof. The kind of proof that doesn't just clear your name, it destroys theirs. We weren't done. Ethan's search turned up an email archive tucked inside a folder labeled taxes_2018. Most of it was routine: receipts, bank statements, boring paper trails. But then we found a thread titled Financial Strategy Mark. I clicked it open. The first line hit like a hammer. Key is timing. Make Jack look like a threat to limit his financial rights. The sender, Mark Sullivan, my ex-wife's financial advisor. The rest of the email read like a playbook. Step-by-step instructions on how to isolate me legally, fabricate evidence, and transfer joint funds without triggering alarms. Words like asset protection and contingency plan were sprinkled in, dressed up as strategy. But it was clear. This wasn't planning. It was an ambush. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He's not just an advisor. He's a co-conspirator. I sat there for a moment, letting the name settle in my mind. Mark Sullivan. It wasn't just Lauren's game anymore. She'd brought in help, which meant she was going to need a lot more than help to get out of it. Once we had Mark's name, the rest started to unravel fast. Ethan pulled up bank records tied to Lauren's accounts, files she must have thought were buried too deep to find. There it was in black and white, our joint account drained in a series of emergency transfers, each one stepping neatly into a new account in Lauren's name alone. From there, the money jumped again, into a shell corporation I'd never heard of, registered under Mark Sullivan. The final leap was the dirtiest. A wire to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. 400 grand, Ethan said, tapping the screen. Gone 6 weeks before you even separated. I stared at the dates. I remembered those weeks. The tension, the arguments. Lauren saying she needed space. It was never about space. It was about time. Time to get the money out before I knew it was missing. I leaned back in the chair, the cold settling deeper in my chest. They hadn't just tried to erase me. They'd robbed me blind. We were almost done combing through the files when Ethan paused, his eyes narrowing at a string of emails between Lauren and Haley. I didn't want to read them. Some part of me knew it would hurt more than any fake document or missing dollar ever could. But I clicked anyway. "Dad doesn't need to know." That was from Haley. Short, casual. Like hiding things from me was just normal. Lauren replied, "The less he knows, the easier this will be." I stared at the words until they blurred. My daughter, the little girl who used to run to the door when I came home from work, was now part of the machinery cutting me out. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I closed the laptop, pressing my hand against the lid, as if that could keep the words inside from spilling any further into me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was family turning the knife. I didn't confront them. Not that night. Not the next day. Instead, I copied everything. The fake restraining order, the forged messages, the emails, the money trail, onto 3 separate flash drives. One went to a safety deposit box, one to Ethan, one to a lawyer I trusted. Then I went quiet. I learned their schedules down to the minute. When Lauren went to her spin classes, when Haley's shifts at the boutique overlapped with Tyler's late nights, when Patricia and George dropped by unannounced. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when spoken to. I even let them think I was looking for work, showing them fake job listings on my phone. Because timing wasn't just part of the plan, it was the plan. When you want to bring down a house of cards, you don't just blow on it. You wait until everyone's leaning on it, thinking it's solid, and then you pull. The chance came in the form of a casual remark over breakfast. Lauren, sipping her almond milk latte, told Patricia on the phone that they should all do brunch next Sunday. The whole family plus a few friends. That was it. My cue. Patricia and George loved a full house. Lauren loved an audience. And I needed witnesses. Brunch at Lauren's wasn't just a meal. It was a performance. The table would be perfectly set, the mimosas flowing, the conversation sharpened into little daggers meant to keep me in my place. This time, I'd let them play their parts right up until the moment the script flipped. I spent the week reviewing everything. Every file, every photo, every transfer record. I rehearsed exactly what I'd say and when I'd say it. Not too soon, Not too late. The right 3 sentences, in the right order, in front of the right people. They thought Sunday would be their stage. I knew it would be the day the curtain dropped. The night before brunch, I laid everything out on the basement table. The black folder, a plain leather binder that looked harmless enough, sat open, each page in plastic sleeves. Fake restraining order, forged text messages, the email thread with Mark Sullivan, bank statements tracing the stolen 400 grand all the way to the Caymans. I checked them twice, then a third time. Every date, every signature, every transfer matched. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a case. I set my suit out, navy blue, pressed crisp. Not too flashy, but sharp enough to look like I belonged at the head of any table. My shoes gleamed under the weak basement light. Upstairs, I could hear Lauren moving around, probably setting out the good china, rehearsing her little barbs for tomorrow. I smiled to myself. She thought she was getting ready for another flawless Sunday performance. She had no idea she was setting the stage for her own closing act. Sunday morning, the house smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. Sunlight poured through the big kitchen windows, catching the crystal glasses already lined up on the dining table. Lauren moved between the kitchen and dining room with the precision of someone hosting a magazine photo shoot. I played my role, the quiet, slightly awkward ex-husband who was still finding his footing. I smiled when someone made a polite jab, nodded when spoken to, kept my tone mild. Patricia and George arrived first, their voices carrying down the hall. Then Haley and Tyler showed up, laughing about some inside joke they didn't bother to explain. I stayed in the background, letting them fill the room with their noise, their confidence, their certainty that I posed no threat. Lauren was radiant, soaking in the attention, pouring mimosas like a queen distributing favors. I let them have their moment. They thought brunch was starting. For me, it had already begun. The conversation rolled along exactly as I knew it would. Tyler bragging about his dad's latest win at the firm, George praising stability like it was a rare virtue only certain people could achieve. Haley threw me a question about my job search. Her tone dipped in honey, but her eyes sharp. Then Lauren leaned back in her chair, glass of mimosa in hand, and said it again. "You're a nobody, Jack. Stop acting like you're important." The laughter came instantly, warm and easy for them, sharp and cutting for me. Patricia smirked behind her napkin. Tyler shook his head with a grin. I didn't say a word. Instead, I picked up my fork and tapped it gently against my glass. Ting. The crystal's ring cut through the room. Every eye turned toward me. I let the silence breathe. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3 sentences, I said evenly. And in that moment, the balance of the room shifted. They didn't know it yet, but the performance was over. I let my gaze move slowly around the table, meeting each set of eyes in turn. Tyler's smirk faltered first. George leaned back slightly, frowning as if he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. Then I spoke. "I'm not broke on information anymore." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, small at first, but rippling outward. Patricia's smile thinned. Haley shifted in her seat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calm was the point. Calm meant control, and control was the one thing they thought I'd lost. Lauren tilted her head, forcing a laugh that sounded a little too sharp. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I didn't answer her question. I just let the weight of the first sentence hang in the air, heavier with each passing second. 3 sentences, I'd said, and I had 2 left. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table like I was about to tell them a secret. My eyes stayed locked on Lauren's. "When the data speaks," I said slowly, "lies die." Her smile froze, the corners of her mouth twitching like she was deciding whether to scoff or stay silent. The golden shimmer of her mimosa caught the light, but her hand holding the glass didn't move. Tyler glanced at Haley, a quick flick of the eyes that told me they both felt the shift. George cleared his throat, as if trying to break the moment. Patricia smoothed her napkin in her lap, pretending not to be listening as closely as she was. I didn't blink. I wanted Lauren to see that I meant every word, that I wasn't bluffing. By the time I reached the 3rd sentence, there'd be no pretending this was just another brunch. And judging by the way her fingers tightened on that glass, she knew it too. I shifted my gaze down the table to Mark Sullivan, seated just close enough to Lauren to signal his loyalty without making it obvious. "Mark," I said, my tone almost casual, "I like the way you write emails." The fork in his hand paused mid-air. For a fraction of a second, he didn't move. Then he set it down carefully, eyes narrowing. Lauren's head snapped toward him, a flash of confusion cutting through her polished composure. Haley frowned, looking between the two of them, sensing something she couldn't quite place. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind. It was tight, electric, waiting to break. I reached under the table, lifted the black folder, and set it gently in the center like I was presenting dessert. The leather creaked as I slid it toward Lauren. Her hand stayed in her lap. "Go ahead," I said. "Turn the page." And just like that, the table was no longer hers. The folder landed in front of Lauren with a soft thud, but the sound seemed to echo in the sudden stillness of the room. She didn't touch it at first. Her eyes moved over the cover like she could read through the leather, already sensing the danger inside. "Open it," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. When she didn't move, I reached forward, flipped the cover myself, and began sliding the pages into view one by one. First, the fake restraining order, with the retired judge's signature and the wrong case number. Then the forged text messages, complete with metadata tracing them back to her laptop. Next, the email thread with Mark, spelling out in plain language how to cut me out financially. Finally, the bank statements. Every transfer, every shell company, every offshore deposit. No one spoke. Even the sound of cutlery and glasses had stopped. Lauren's face had drained of color. "This," I said, tapping the stack of evidence, "is why lies die when data speaks." I didn't wait for her to speak. The folder sat there, open like a wound on the table, bleeding out everything they'd tried to hide. Eyes darted between the pages, George scanning the bank statements, Patricia frozen with her hand on her glass, Haley staring at the fake messages like she'd never seen them before. Mark shifted in his chair, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a glance. Instead, I pushed back my chair slowly, the wooden legs scraping across the polished floor. The sound was loud in the silence, a kind of punctuation. I stood, straightened my jacket, and without another word, turned toward the door. Behind me, the air cracked. The shuffle of papers, the sharp inhale of someone realizing the game was over, the low murmur of voices that had lost their confident edge. By the time the front door closed behind me, I wasn't the man who'd walked into that brunch. I was the man who'd ended it. It didn't take long for the ripples to start. That afternoon, texts started popping up on my phone from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were short. "What happened at brunch?" Others were longer, full of half-formed rumors and screenshots that had already started circulating. Apparently, someone at the table had gone straight to social media before I even reached my car. The posts didn't last long, deleted within hours, but not before they were shared, saved, and whispered about in the corners of the circles Lauren valued most. By evening, a friend called to tell me he'd overheard Mark's name in a hushed conversation at a downtown bar. "They're panicking," he said. Good, that was the point. The folder hadn't just been evidence, it was a fuse, and now the explosion was moving through their lives, room by room, faster than they could shut the doors. By Monday morning, I was sitting across from Miriam Chan, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being relentless in court and surgical in preparation. Her office overlooked Congress Avenue, all glass and sharp lines, the kind of place that made you sit up straighter. I slid the black folder across her desk. She put on her reading glasses and began turning pages without a word, her expression unreadable. 10 minutes passed in silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of paper. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Jack, this isn't just a messy divorce. This is conspiracy, wire fraud, forgery, possibly obstruction." She tapped the page with the bank transfers. "And this," she said, "is going to get the attention of federal investigators." I didn't smile. I just nodded. For months, I'd been living in a basement, feeling like I was trapped in someone else's story. Now, for the first time, I was in the opening chapter of my own. Miriam didn't waste time. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started listing names. Investigators she trusted, a forensic accountant who could track every cent, a private process server who knew how to deliver paperwork, so it couldn't be ignored. "We'll start with a preservation order," she said, her pen moving fast. "That freezes any attempt to delete files or move funds. Then, subpoenas for Mark's firm and Lauren's company records. If they've touched these accounts, we'll see it." I watched her work, the controlled precision in every line she wrote. "This isn't about getting even," she said finally, meeting my eyes. "It's about making sure they don't get away with it." I thought of Lauren's smirk at brunch, of Mark's stillness when I'd called out his emails, of Haley's quick glances that morning when she'd realized something was off. "They won't," I said. Miriam set down her pen, nodding once. Then let's make it official. 2 days later, Mark Sullivan was served in the middle of a client lunch at a high-end steakhouse downtown. The process server, a wiry guy in a worn leather jacket, walked straight to the table, pulled an envelope from his inside pocket, and set it neatly in front of Mark. "You've been served," he said, his voice carrying just enough to turn heads. Mark's smile froze mid-sentence. He didn't touch the envelope. The man in the tailored suit across from him glanced at the papers, then at Mark, his eyebrows lifting. By the time the server walked out, half the restaurant was watching. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from Miriam. Step 1 complete. I could picture it. Mark's careful, curated reputation developing hairline cracks, the kind that spread fast once the pressure builds. And the pressure was only beginning. Lauren's summons came the next morning. The process server caught her just as she was stepping out of her BMW in front of her catering office. She was wearing a tailored navy dress, sunglasses big enough to hide half her face, and the look of someone who owned the sidewalk she walked on. "Lauren Miller?" the server asked, holding out the envelope. She hesitated, glancing toward the glass doors where 2 of her employees stood frozen, watching. Then she took it, her hand tightening around the papers as if she could crush them into nothing. The server nodded politely and walked away, leaving her alone in the middle of the parking lot with the legal weight of her actions in her hands. I didn't see it happen, but by noon I had 3 texts from people in her orbit. She's furious. She canceled her afternoon meetings. Something's wrong. Something was wrong, all right. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the narrative. I was. By the end of the week, the story had started leaking in ways I hadn't planned, and didn't need to stop. A paralegal at Mark's firm accidentally mentioned the subpoenas to a friend at a law office across town. That friend told someone at the country club. By Friday evening, Lauren's name and Mark's were being whispered over cocktails and behind closed office doors. The polite smiles they'd once received were still there, but they'd changed. Now they were laced with curiosity, maybe even pity. In a social circle built on perception, that was the first sign of decay. Haley didn't call. She didn't text. But I heard from Ethan that she'd been spotted leaving Lauren's office midweek, her expression tight, phone pressed to her ear. They were circling the wagons, trying to control the damage. What they didn't realize was that the damage was already baked in. The cracks weren't just showing, they were widening, and every hour made them harder to hide. Miriam's forensic accountant, a lean man named Walter Briggs, had the quiet patience of someone who could spend hours staring at numbers without blinking. We met in her office, the black folder open between us. Walter flipped through the bank statements, marking transactions with a yellow pencil. "Here," he said, circling a series of small withdrawals made in the weeks before the larger transfers. They were testing the water, making sure the route worked before moving the big sums. He traced the path on a legal pad like it was a map: joint account, Lauren's personal, shell company, Cayman account. "It's clean enough to fool a casual audit," Walter said, "but not clean enough to survive a subpoena." Miriam smiled faintly. "Which it won't." Walter closed the folder, slid it toward me. "With this trail, they'll fold before it ever goes to trial. People like this don't want their names on court records." I didn't say it out loud, but I wasn't aiming for them to fold. I wanted them exposed. While Walter dug through the money trail, Ethan kept working on the digital side. Late one night, he called me from his apartment, his voice sharper than usual. "I think you should see this in person," he said. 20 minutes later, I was standing over his desk, watching as he pulled up a folder labeled Archive Personal. Inside were dozens of audio files, each named by date. Ethan clicked one. Lauren's voice filled the room. "Mark says if we push the court date back, Jack will burn through whatever savings he has left. By then, he'll take whatever deal we put in front of him." Another file. Haley this time. "He's not fighting. He's just existing. It's almost sad." I stood there, hands on the back of Ethan's chair, listening to the people I once called family talk about me, like I was already gone. Ethan clicked pause. "They recorded themselves," he said. "Meetings, calls, planning everything. And they kept it all." The evidence was no longer just paper and numbers. Now it had a voice. We didn't rush the audio to Miriam. Not yet. Ethan and I listened to every file, cataloging them by date, subject, and speaker. The conversations painted a timeline. When the plan started, how it evolved, and exactly who played which role. Some recordings were casual, almost careless. Lauren venting to Patricia over wine. Mark giving step-by-step instructions like he was teaching a class. Others were cold and deliberate. Strategy sessions with every detail plotted, right down to what day I should be served with fake documents. "This is bigger than a divorce case," Ethan said one night, leaning back in his chair. "This is organized fraud," I agreed. But I also knew dropping it all at once would give them a single battle to fight. I didn't want a battle. I wanted a siege, the kind that slowly eats through the walls until there's nothing left to defend. And now, with voices to match the paper trail, the siege had begun. The first leak wasn't to the police. It wasn't even to Miriam. It was to a local business reporter I'd known for years, someone who made a living exposing white-collar games in Austin's upper circles. Over coffee at a quiet diner, I slid a flash drive across the table. "No names yet," I told her. "Just a story about how far people will go to bury someone they once called family." She plugged it into her laptop right there, eyes narrowing as she scrolled through bank records and the forged restraining order. "This is real?" she asked. "Every line," I said. She didn't promise to run it, and I didn't ask her to. But I knew the look in her eyes, the one reporters get when they smell something bigger than a headline. By the next afternoon, whispers had started in circles I hadn't touched. Not about Lauren, not yet, just about a fraud case, involving a well-connected financial advisor. And that was exactly where I wanted the cracks to spread first. Within days, Mark Sullivan's name started showing up less on social calendars and more in quiet, uneasy conversations. Invitations he would normally get without asking suddenly got lost. Golf partners were too busy. His seat at the country club's monthly dinner mysteriously went to someone else. Lauren noticed. She might not have known the full reason yet, but she felt the shift, the way people smiled at her just a beat too long, the way they asked, "How are things?" with that slow, loaded tone. Patricia called her twice in one morning. George sent a terse email. "We need to talk." From my seat in the basement, I didn't need to see it to know the effect. Social capital is like glass. Once it cracks, it never looks the same. And I wasn't done tapping on it, because the next leak wouldn't just freeze them out socially. It would burn the bridge they'd been using to walk over me for months. This time, I didn't hand the flash drive to a reporter. I sent it, anonymously, to 3 of Mark's biggest clients, people with money, influence, and reputations polished to a mirror shine. The files were simple: the forged text messages, the metadata proving they came from Lauren's laptop, and the audio clip of Mark coaching her on how to use them. 10 minutes of listening was all it took to see the game for what it was. By the next morning, one client had canceled his account with Mark's firm. Another demanded an internal review, which in corporate speak means they were already looking for the exit. Ethan forwarded me a text he'd gotten from a friend inside Mark's office. "He's bleeding business and trying to hide it. Good. Money talks louder than gossip. And once the money started walking away from him, the rest of the city would hear it. The siege walls were thinning. I just had to keep pressing." It was almost midnight when my phone lit up with her name. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "Dad?" Her voice was smaller than I remembered, almost unsure. "Can we talk?" I didn't fill the silence for her. She rushed to fill it herself. "I don't know what's happening, but Mom's different. She's angry all the time. Mark's barely around. And people keep calling the house asking questions I don't understand." I let her speak, hearing the edge of fear she was trying to hide. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit to what she'd said in those recordings, but she was reaching out. "What do you want, Haley?" I asked finally. She hesitated. I want to know the truth." I almost told her. Almost. But truth, like evidence, lands harder when it comes at the right moment. "Then keep your eyes open," I said. "You'll see it soon enough." And I hung up. 2 days later, Miriam called me into her office. She had that look, the one she got when she'd found a legal angle sharp enough to cut through steel. "We're filing a motion for expedited discovery," she said, sliding a draft across the desk. "It forces them to produce all digital communications and financial records immediately, before they have time to scrub anything else." I scanned the document. It named Lauren, it named Mark, and it named the shell corporation holding the offshore account. "If the judge signs this," Miriam continued, "we'll have subpoenas in their inboxes by the end of the week. And when they realize how much we already know, they'll make mistakes." I nodded slowly. Mistakes were what I was counting on, the kind that happen when people under pressure try to keep too many lies straight. Miriam smiled faintly. "You said you wanted a siege. This is where we start shaking the walls." And with one signature, we did. The motion landed like a grenade. Within 24 hours, Mark's firm was scrambling to pull files, and the strain showed. Ethan called me that evening. "You're going to like this," he said, sending over an email chain he'd intercepted from a mutual contact. It was between Mark and one of his junior associates. The kid was panicking, asking which documents to hand over. Mark's reply was blunt. "Delete anything tied to Cayman Holdings. Now." Ethan laughed. He just wrote himself into obstruction of justice. I read the line twice, letting the weight of it sink in. Mark wasn't just panicking. He was leaving fingerprints all over his own mess. By morning, Miriam had the email printed, highlighted, and ready to slide into the growing stack of evidence. Mark thought he was covering his tracks. All he was doing was painting a brighter trail for us to follow. If Mark was sloppy, Lauren was theatrical. 2 days after the motion hit, she showed up at my basement door unannounced. She didn't knock, just opened it halfway and leaned in like she was about to offer me a deal. "We don't have to do this in court," she said, her tone syrupy, but her eyes sharp. "We can settle, quietly. No one has to see the ugly side." I stayed seated, letting her talk. She dangled numbers, hinted at shared custody, without drama, even threw in a vague suggestion that we could rebuild some trust. It wasn't an offer. It was bait. When I didn't bite, the smile slipped. "You think you're winning," she said, voice tightening. "But you don't know the people you're messing with." I stood then, closing the gap between us until she had to tilt her head to meet my eyes. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," I said, "and I know exactly what they've done." She left without another word, which told me she'd finally realized this wasn't bluff. 3 days later, the story finally broke. It wasn't the full case. Not yet. The reporter I'd met weeks ago published a feature on questionable financial practices inside Austin's high-net-worth circles. Names were scarce, but the details were sharp. A forged court order, falsified text messages, and a trail of stolen funds leading offshore. Anyone who knew the players could read between the lines. And in this city, plenty did. By noon, Miriam's office phone was ringing nonstop. Other attorneys, journalists, even a former associate of Mark's, who wanted to share a few things off the record. Lauren went silent online. Mark canceled a speaking engagement at the Chamber of Commerce. Ethan texted me a single sentence. "The fire's lit." I didn't respond. Because I knew, fires are easy to start. It's keeping them burning long enough to consume everything that takes patience. That former associate of Mark's wasn't just looking to gossip. Miriam arranged for us to meet him in her office after hours. His name was Daniel Greer, mid-30s, sharp suit, the kind of guy who looked like he'd walked straight out of a corporate brochure. Daniel didn't waste time. "Mark's been moving client funds through Cayman Holdings for years," he said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "Most of the time, the clients never notice because he backfills the accounts before quarterly reports. But when the timing's off, they notice," I finished. He nodded. "And in your case, the timing was intentional. He needed the liquidity to cover another deal that went bad. Lauren gave him access to your accounts to make it happen." I sat back, letting that sink in. This wasn't just about my money anymore. Mark's whole operation was a house of cards, one bad shove from collapse. Daniel slid the flash drive across the desk. "You didn't get this from me." I smiled faintly. "Of course not." But in my head, I was already planning how to use it. Back in the basement, I loaded Daniel's flash drive onto my laptop. The files were meticulous. Spreadsheets, transaction logs, and internal emails that mapped out years of quiet siphoning. Client names I recognized from charity galas and news features were there, each with neat columns showing temporary reallocations that looked harmless on paper, except they weren't harmless. They were theft disguised as timing. I cross-referenced the dates with my own stolen funds. The overlap was perfect. The same week my account was drained, 2 other clients had short-term liquidity adjustments that just happened to vanish into the same shell corporation. Ethan joined me on a call, his voice low but electric. "Jack, this isn't just personal anymore. This is systemic. You blow this open, you're not just taking them down, you're detonating the whole network." I leaned back, staring at the tangled web on my screen. Good. Because I wasn't interested in just winning my case. I was interested in ending theirs. The next morning I dropped Daniel's flash drive on Miriam's desk. She plugged it in without a word, scrolling through the files with the same steady focus she'd had the first time I showed her the black folder. 5 minutes in, she stopped, leaning back in her chair. "This isn't just enough to bury them in civil court. This is federal." She tapped the screen. "We've got interstate wire transfers, forged legal documents, conspiracy to defraud multiple clients. The DOJ would salivate over this." Her tone sharpened. "But we don't hand it over yet. Not until we've tightened every bolt and made sure we control the narrative. If we give this to them too soon, they run the show. I want us holding the reins." I nodded. That was exactly why I'd come to her in the first place. Miriam closed the laptop. "You wanted a siege? This is the part where the walls start caving in from the inside." And I could already hear them cracking. If the walls were going to fall, I needed someone on the inside when they did. And there was only one person who could play that role, Haley. I texted her mid-afternoon. "Coffee? Just us." She agreed, though her reply was hesitant. We met at a quiet cafe away from her usual spots. She looked tired, older somehow, like the last few weeks had stripped away the certainty she wore so easily before. I didn't start with accusations. I started with a simple line. "I have proof of everything." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. So I slid a single sheet of paper across the table, the email where Lauren told Mark to delay the court date so I'd burn through my savings. Haley read it twice. Her hand shook just enough for me to notice. "She lied to you too," I said. "You were just another piece in her plan." She didn't deny it. She didn't defend her. She just whispered, "What do you want me to do?" And I knew I had her. I leaned in, keeping my voice low enough that even the barista behind the counter couldn't hear. "Don't confront her. Don't change your routine. Just listen. And when she talks, make her talk more." Haley frowned. "You want me to spy on my own mom?" "I want you to protect yourself," I said. "Because when this comes down, and it will, she'll make sure you're the first one under the bus if it keeps her safe." I watched the conflict play across her face, loyalty wrestling with fear, love twisted by betrayal. Finally, she nodded. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." We parted without a hug, without ceremony, just two people walking out of the same cafe in different directions. But as I slid into my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Haley. "She's meeting Mark tomorrow night. I'll find out where." The seed was planted. Now it just needed time to grow. The next evening, Haley's text came through at 8:17 p.m. Cedar Grove Inn, private dining room. I knew the place. An old money hideout on the edge of town where deals were made in candlelight and no one asked for receipts. Ethan and I were parked half a block away by 8:45. Through the inn's tall front windows, we could see the glow of the dining room, but the private rooms were tucked deeper inside, too far for a clean photo. That's where Haley came in. She'd arrived 10 minutes earlier under the pretense of dropping something off for her mother. In reality, she had a tiny recording device tucked inside her purse, switched on before she walked in. At 9:32, my phone lit up with a file transfer from her. No message, just the audio. Ethan hit play. Lauren's voice first, tight, clipped. "We can't afford another leak, Mark. You have to shut it down." Then Mark, "I'm handling it. But if Jack keeps pushing, we'll make it look like he's laundering the money." We sat in the car, the weight of the words settling like lead. They weren't just planning to defend themselves. They were planning their next attack. The next morning, I was in Miriam's office with Ethan, the audio file playing from her laptop. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her pen tapping lightly against her legal pad. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair, a slow smile forming. "They don't realize how bad this is for them," she said. "Not just the content, the fact they were recorded discussing it. That's intent, Jack. And intent is everything in court." Ethan crossed his arms. "And if they try to claim the recording's fake, we've got the metadata from the device. Clean chain of custody." Miriam nodded, already scribbling notes. "We'll add this to the expedited discovery motion. If the judge hears this before they respond, it's going to put them in a corner they can't get out of without perjuring themselves." I didn't say anything, but I could feel it. The shift. For months, I'd been reacting to them. Now they were reacting to me. 2 days later, Miriam and I were in a small, wood-paneled courtroom for the discovery hearing. Lauren and Mark sat at the opposite table with their attorneys, all polished confidence, until Miriam queued up the recording. Lauren's voice filled the room first. "We can't afford another leak, Mark. You have to shut it down." Then Mark's reply. "I'm handling it. But if Jack keeps pushing, we'll make it look like he's laundering the money." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark's attorney shifted in his seat, pen frozen mid-note. Lauren stared straight ahead, but the slight tremor in her jaw gave her away. The judge didn't speak right away. He just looked at them for a long moment, then turned to their lawyers. "Counsel, I strongly advise your clients to reconsider their approach to this matter." It wasn't a ruling, but it was a crack in their armor, one made in full view of the court record, and I intended to drive a wedge into it. The very next morning, Miriam's phone rang. It was Lauren's attorney. No bluster this time, no threats, just a request to explore settlement discussions. Miriam put it on speaker so I could hear. The man's voice was smooth, but there was a tightness beneath it. My client is prepared to make certain concessions, if we can avoid further court appearances. Specifics? Miriam asked, her tone like steel under velvet. Division of assets in your client's favor, full custody arrangement review, and an agreement to cease any further evidence submissions that might be damaging to reputations. I caught Miriam's eye and shook my head. She smiled faintly. We'll consider it, she said, but my client isn't interested in partial truths. When she hung up, she leaned back in her chair. They're fishing to see how much more we have. And? I asked. She tapped the black folder, then the new flash drive from Daniel. We've got enough to drown them, so we let them sweat. If they were going to sweat, I wanted the room hotter. Ethan helped me compile a new package, not everything, just enough to make their lives miserable in the right places. Copies of the forged restraining order, select excerpts from the audio files, a clean chart of the money trail from our joint account to the Caymans. We sent it anonymously to 3 places: the licensing board that oversaw Mark's financial credentials, the nonprofit board Lauren chaired, and the private school where Patricia served as treasurer. By the end of the week, Mark was temporarily suspended pending investigation. Lauren's nonprofit profile vanished from their website, and Patricia had to step back from her duties while they reviewed a conflict of interest. None of it was final. None of it was the killing blow. But it was smoke, thick, black, and public enough that everyone could smell the fire. And the more they tried to stamp it out, the more oxygen I planned to give it. It was late, just after 11, when Haley called again. This time, there was no hesitation. She's falling apart, she said. Mark's not answering her calls, and Patricia's furious about being dragged into this. Mom's talking about leaving town for a while. I stayed quiet, letting her unload. She told me about slammed doors, whispered arguments over speakerphone, and a dinner where Lauren barely touched her food. Then her voice dropped lower. She keeps saying you won't stop until you've destroyed her. Is that true? I thought about how to answer. I'm not destroying her, Haley. I'm just showing everyone what she actually is. The rest, she's doing herself. Haley was silent for a long time. Then, if I get you her laptop, could you use it? Yes. Then I'll find a way. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the dark screen of my phone. The siege was working. And now, the gate on the inside was starting to open. 2 days later, Haley texted me a single word. Now. I drove to a grocery store parking lot on the far side of town. She was already there, sitting in her car with the engine running. When I pulled up beside her, she didn't get out, just reached across the passenger seat and lifted a slim silver laptop into view. She's at the spa, Haley said, eyes darting toward the lot's entrance. 3 hours, maybe less. I need it back before she notices. I took it, slipped it into my bag without ceremony. You'll have it. Back at Ethan's place, we hooked it to his forensic rig. The system began cloning the drive, pulling every file, every email, every hidden archive. Within minutes, Ethan whistled low. She's got a folder labeled insurance, and Jack, it's not hers. It's dirt on other people, judges, business partners, even a state rep. I leaned over his shoulder, scrolling through names I recognized. Lauren hadn't just been playing dirty, she'd been building an arsenal. We went through the insurance folder for hours, piecing together its logic. Each file was a weapon, compromising photos, private financial statements, intercepted emails, all neatly labeled with the target's name, and in some cases, notes on how it could be used if necessary. It wasn't just leverage, it was protection. She's been holding this over people for years, Ethan said, scrolling past a zip file marked with the state rep's initials. If anyone tried to cross her, she could ruin them in a week. And now I understood why Lauren had always moved with such untouchable confidence. It wasn't just charm or manipulation. It was insurance in the truest sense. But possession of this folder was a double-edged sword. If I used it recklessly, I'd be no better than her. If I used it strategically, I could dismantle her network piece by piece. I zipped a copy, encrypted it, and slid the drive into my pocket. The siege was almost over. All that was left was the final breach. It happened in the same place it started, at brunch. Different table, different tone. This time Miriam sat beside me, the black folder and Daniel's flash drive in her bag. Across from us, Lauren and Mark looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. No mimosas, no smirks. Just 2 people who knew the ground under them was gone. Miriam slid a single sheet across the table, A draft settlement. No negotiations, no counteroffers. Full return of my stolen funds plus damages, custody arrangements in my favor, and, buried in the fine print, an agreement to cooperate with federal investigators. Lauren's hands trembled as she signed. Mark's jaw worked like he wanted to speak but couldn't. When the papers were back in Miriam's bag, I stood. "You took years from me," I said quietly, "but the truth took everything from you." I walked out into the sunlight, the weight I'd carried for months gone. The siege was over. The walls had fallen, and all that was left of them was rubble.